What is happening with Canadian immigration today? This is the question that I think pretty much every post-grad work permit holder is asking themselves. This is not the world that I saw when I made the first decision to study in Canada. I envisioned that there would be a nice pathway to permanent residence, and that pathway would be waiting for me by the time I completed my studies and completed my 1 or 2 years, maybe even 3 years of Canadian work experience, but simply not the case. Minister Miller here has made a series of announcements recently that have really shaken the foundation that all of these postgrad work permit holders, maybe even you, are standing on. And with the options for permanent residence becoming more and more difficult to achieve, what do? Well, in this lesson, what I'm going to talk about is one of those strategies that I think it would really surprise you. And no one that I know of is even talking about this. How do you qualify? How do you make yourself more competitive? Get a job offer, LMIA-based job offer, right? You do that, 50 points, boom, your problems are all solved. Well, how many of your employers are really able to do that? Realistically, Minister Miller has been pointing out recently that maybe there aren't enough jobs to go around for Canadians. And so therefore they need to reduce the number of temporary residents. That companies are relying upon foreign workers, which is causing wages to be suppressed. All of these talking points, super political, leading up to an election next year. But who cares about that? If you are a temporary foreign worker right now in Canada, whether you're a postgrad work permit holder, whether you're on a spousal open work permit or something else, there is no guarantee anymore that just because you've studied, you've worked in Canada, that there's going to be a pathway for permanent residence. But in this lesson, I am going to share something with you that I hope will at least give you another option to consider. Now, it's not for everybody, and I'll explain that as we slide over and take a look at this strategy. But I truly believe it is something that can potentially unlock permanent residence for you. Let's slide over and take a look. We're going to get a little help here from Johnny No Chance. Maybe it's French. No chance? Regardless, I think you guys know where I'm going with this. Here's his human capital. Does this sound like you? If it sounds like you, I want you to pay attention. Well, who am I kidding? I want all of you to pay attention regardless. He's 27 years old. He's single. He's got a bachelor's degree. Well, in this case, it could be 3 or 4 years, but 3 years is enough to trigger those extra points, right, within CRS. His IELTS scores are pretty good. So he has just about maximum English scores, except he's got a CLB 9 in speaking. He's got a level 7. So 8.5 in listening, 7.5 in writing, 8.5 in reading, and a 7 in speaking. Doesn't speak French. He has no foreign work experience. So in fact, when Johnny came over, he expected to study, complete his bachelor's degree, and then, permanent residence was guaranteed, right? No, it's not. So he has accumulated the 1 year of foreign work experience in Canada, but he doesn't have an LMIA, no PNP nomination, no relatives in Canada. So basically, none of those extra bonus points that can set you apart. And many of you are in this exact situation. Now, you might be a little bit different. Maybe your English scores aren't quite as high. Maybe you don't have a bachelor's. Maybe you just have, maybe you just have a 2-year college diploma. Well, some of you could have a master's. Maybe you have 2 or more credentials. Maybe you studied, in your home country before you came. But when we look at Johnny, here is our basic premise, okay? What score does Johnny have? Let's take a look. So if we slide over to the next slide, you can see right now, Johnny, this gives him 471 points. You can see the breakdown here. I don't need to go into this in great detail, but essentially you can see as far as the bonus points, he's getting 30 points right there for having that 3-year program. Okay, that's it for the additional bonus points. Where most people fall short, it's not the human capital factors. Johnny's getting max age. He's only 27. His level of education is not bad. He could have a little bit more. Like I said, his official languages is almost perfect. Like, what is perfect? 136, I think. And he has 1 year of Canadian work experience. So he's getting those 40 points, a total of 403, which is super competitive. But where Johnny is falling a little bit short here is within the skill transferability factors, right? His official language scores are really high, so that's great. And when you combine that with his education, he's getting 25 extra points for official language. And when you combine his education, which in this case is the bachelor's degree, plus Canadian work experience, when you combine those two, and remember, he has 1 year of Canadian work experience, he's getting 13. So he's a little bit shy of the maximum 50 points he could get here. Then when it comes to foreign work experience, he's not getting any points. So what are the maximum total points that Johnny could get under the skill transferability factors? Well, it's 50 here and 50 here, which is basically, well, it is 100 points, but he is not hitting that level. All right. I think you guys can see where I'm going with this. And so the subtotal for his skill transferability is only 38 when it could be 100. So Johnny has some options. There's some things that he can do. Let's go to the next slide. Let's say Johnny keeps working and he gets 2 years of work experience in Canada. Everything else stays the same, but he's got 2 years of work experience in Canada. How many points? It jumps to 496. Why? Because he now has 50 of the skill transferability points. And that's really big. That's really important. You're kind of getting into the range. And if we look at the rounds of invitations, we know that those scores have been consistently above 500. So right now, and we're not talking about the category-based draws, we're not talking about any of that. We're talking about all of you who don't fit into those other options. Those of you who do not have a nomination, those of you who do not have a job offer. You know, you might have study in Canada, but you don't have siblings in Canada. You don't have French in Canada. All right. So we're talking about the average person, all of you, which is the vast majority of you who are wondering if you even have a shot going forward. So what is the option? And this is I think the thing that's going to surprise, well, for sure, it's going to surprise the vast majority of you what I'm going to say next. You're here. Let me paint this scenario. We know Johnny, no chance. Most of you are probably in the high 490s if you're similar to Johnny. Some of you, like I said, might be a little bit higher. Some might be a little bit lower, but you're right around that, 480 to 490 range. And your work permits are expiring. You can see that at the end of this year, maybe mid-year, many of you are just not going to have a pathway forward. People say, oh, get your employer to get you an LMIA. Sure, that would be great. But we know this guy right here has said they're going to start to reduce temporary residence, not expand them. In fairness, if your employer can show legitimately that they can't find a Canadian or permanent resident, well, then it's possible they could get a labor market impact assessment. But why do they not want to do that? Because they're going to have to pay you more. The prevailing wage rate for LMIAs is not the entry wages that they're paying all of you guys. It's considerably higher. That's a whole different discussion. I'm not going to get into it. And if you're working in a position where there are Canadians and permanent residents that would like those jobs, well, the employer doesn't matter what they do, how much they want to keep you, they would have to offer that job to a Canadian first. That's the world of LMIAs. Then they say, well, learn French. Oh my goodness. How hard is it to learn French? Well, it's pretty freaking hard. I spent 2 years in Portugal when I was 20 years old, from 20 to 22. And at that time, I was immersed. Like in the Portuguese language, I was in Portugal. I had missionary companions with me where, they didn't speak English. And in that 2 years, I learned to speak Portuguese. But to do so in Canada when you're not in Quebec, and that might be a whole other discussion. Maybe you move to Quebec, get your work experience there, learn French, immerse yourself. And then once you've got that certain level of French, maybe you do have a pathway forward when it comes to one of the Quebec-based programs. But if not, if you're at that CLB 7 level, that could potentially push you into a range. That's all fine and dandy. But oh my goodness, to get to that level, when you're, say, living in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, or Lethbridge, Alberta, where I am based, that is not an easy feat. And it takes time, and you guys don't have the time. So your work permits are expiring. Job offer is not an option. Learning French, that ship has sailed. What do you do? Well, One thing you do not want to do is stay past the expiry of your work permit and hope that there's going to be some miracle and that Minister Miller is going to come and save you like Minister Fraser did before he moved on with those magical 18-month post-grad work permits. We know the discussions with Minister Miller, that ain't going to happen. And in fact, he's reiterated that there is not going to be a pathway for everyone who's here in Canada. So what is the default? If you do not have a pathway to continue to extend your work permit or to stay, you need to go home. I'm going to show you right now why that may just be the best decision that you could ever make. Let's slide over and let's take a look at what happens now. We know here, 496, Mr. Johnny No Chance, when you combine 2 years of work experience in Canada with all of these other human capital factors here, we know that Johnny No Chance, whoops, I jumped ahead too far. Johnny No Chance is sitting at 496. Okay, let's see what happens when Johnny says, man, I can't stay. My work permit's expiring. I'm not willing to, to fall out of status and cause enforcement action to be taken against me, to lose out on the ability to maybe come back at a future day if opportunities arise. In this case, Johnny says, nope, I'm going to comply. I know I've got a good, awesome Canadian bachelor's degree. It's going to open up doors for me, and I'm going to be able to go home and get a really good job in my country, at least at a tier 3, and accumulate what we have here, 1 year of foreign work experience. So Johnny goes home and Johnny gets a job and he works. Okay. And now understand, I'm just pointing it out. Every single one of you out there, when I say you could and should potentially consider going home, do not ever do that unless you've had a very good consultation with an immigration lawyer or someone you trust to canvass and make sure that that truly is the last option available to you. Because there may be something you're not aware of. There may be some a program or some opportunity. So this is truly one of the options of last resort, but it's designed to give you guys hope. Let's slide back here and keep talking about this. So once again, 1 year of foreign work experience. What's another example of this? And once again, I'm going to say this with a caveat. Every situation is different. Every person is different. But maybe you've got an employer and you are a knowledge-based worker where the company is based in Vancouver. You live in Lethbridge, Alberta, like many of my friends who currently do this right now have work that's based in Vancouver. But because of the pandemic and the willingness of employers to allow workers to work remotely, they actually leave and, the province and go to somewhere where it's more affordable, especially when you've got a family. Well, in some cases, if things are done properly, and I highly caveat this, if things are done properly, it may be possible for you to return home and keep working for that Canadian employer. And what's the difference between having worked in Canada for that employer and being outside of Canada and working for that employer? That work experience is no longer Canadian experience. It becomes foreign work experience. So it's nuanced, it's tricky, but in that case, that may be an option for some of you knowledge-based workers. But for the rest of you, you're going to take a look at this and you're going to say, okay, 1 year of foreign work experience. Remember that for the Canadian experience class, you need to maintain, well, basically, or demonstrate that you have worked at least 1 year in the previous 3 years to continue being eligible. So you could actually, depending upon your work history, feasibly return home, gain 1 year of foreign work experience, and still have a year to spare almost where you continue to be eligible for CEC. You don't have to actually be in Canada to be eligible for the Canadian Experience class. So without further ado, where does this leave Johnny if he chooses to go home and work 1 year as basically an acquire foreign work experience? Where does that leave him? It leaves him right here. And you kind of had a little sneak peek there. 546 points. Is that in the range? Yes, it is. That is actually in the range where if there were a general draw, and remember, if they choose to do a CEC, you're still potentially eligible, right? So let's look at where the points are coming from. And you can see them right here. 50 maximum points you can have for education combined with official language. We know that he's hitting at least that CLB 9, so he's getting 25 points for that. Canadian work experience and education, he's getting his 25 points for that. And why? Just to flip back here, I'll show you. Remember, this works for 2 years of foreign work experience. Obviously, if you only have 1 year of foreign work experience, 1 year of Canadian work experience in Canada. If you only have 1 year, then the reality is the scores, this is going to be commensurately lower, maybe like 25 points lower, essentially. But or I should say, it's going to drop from 25 to, I think, 13 points is what we were looking at in the other slide. So Canadian work experience 25. That's maximizing the 50 points here. But here's the kicker. Look at what happens when you have that 1 year of foreign work experience. You couple the foreign work experience with the good official language, the CLB 9 at least, and Canadian and foreign work experience. When combined, you can acquire 25 extra points. Now, I want to point out as well, you guys, that when you are claiming points for foreign work experience, 1 year and 2 year really doesn't make a difference. So if you work 1 year versus working 2 years, you're still on the same level when it comes to skill transferability points. So it's really 1 year that's the magical number. And once you hit 50 points, you can't get any more. So for example, let's say you have 3 years of foreign work experience and you have 2 years of Canadian work experience, you could potentially have 50 points here. But 50 and 25 doesn't add up to 75 here because you can only hit a maximum of 50 points. Okay? So I hope you can see here that this method maximizes your skill transferability points and can then push you up into that range of 546. And nobody is talking about this. Nobody is. Everybody is so freaked out about what Minister Miller is talking about that all they can think about is, how do I stay? How do I stay? Well, you guys, staying may not actually be the best option for you. So this is a pathway. This is something that I want people to understand exists. And if you are not already maximizing your skill transferability points for whatever reason, maybe you don't have, like I said, that 3 years of foreign work experience coupled with good language and and good education. And remember, to maximize your skill transferability points on the education front, to get the full 50, you need to have at least 2 or more credentials, one of which being at least 3 years. So some of you may fit in, and maybe this strategy doesn't add any more points for you. But for people who are young, who fit into the situation here of Johnny No Chance, and just to go back here, I'm going to reiterate these factors so that you can see them. And if you're in this range, this is a possibility. 27 years old, single, bachelor's degree, IELTS that's just about perfect, except the 7 here, I just made that a 9 just for kicks. So this is equivalent of a CLB 9, which gives basically 3 points less than you would normally have. This person doesn't have French, but this is what they have: 1 year of foreign work experience and at least 2 years of foreign work work experience in Canada. And then none of the other stuff are present. All right. So hopefully this was helpful to you. In my Express Entry Accelerator, and there's a link below, we talk about all of this in the course. It is a complete step-by-step course to walk you through the whole process. And not only that, it includes every second and fourth Wednesday of the month. I jump on live for 2 hours just in a session, just like my live Q&As you see here right on this channel. And I answer questions from anyone who subscribed to the course, whether it's back in 2015 when I created the first version, all the way through. Anyone can come, anyone who's subscribed, anyone who comes, subscribes, and I update the course gets the benefit of the new course. But it's all designed to help you understand what your options really are when you want to DIY it, when you want to do it yourself. So happy to help support you guys. Hopefully this lesson was of use to you and you learned something new. But as far as I'm concerned, this surprising strategy of maybe going home may very well be the solution that allows you to stay in Canada permanently. All right, take care. I welcome your responses. I want to see your comments below.